Akatsuki is well known as one of the most prolific and beloved criminal organizations in all of anime. Whether it be their character designs, their rich backstories, or their horrific deaths, the Akatsuki have had a stranglehold over the anime community and their merch lines for a long time. Though while the Akatsuki are known for many things, one of the things that they are not known for is infighting. And that's kind of ironic when you consider the fact that literally every iteration of the Akatsuki ever has had a traitor. And in fact, at some points, the Akatsuki had up to 3 traitors. See, because whether or not it was Obito manipulating the other members of the Akatsuki into the Eye of the Moon plan, something he himself didn't fully understand because he was being manipulated by Madara, who also didn't fully understand the Eye of the Moon plan because he was being manipulated by Black Zetsu. At the very top end of the Akatsuki, those who were leading the others below them into essentially the end of the world were kind of acting as traitors, whether knowingly or non-knowingly. But if you want to get less minute with it, Orochimaru and Itachi were both at one point members of the Akatsuki. And Orochimaru only joined the Akatsuki to get their snake hands on Itachi's body, and Itachi was, well, at least so far as we know, feeding information to Konoha about the movements of the Akatsuki. And yet when it boils down to it, we only witnessed, while all the Akatsuki members were alive, one circumstance of Akatsuki members fighting against each other, and that was Itachi versus Orochimaru. Ironically, a battle between the 2 traitors on the Akatsuki. Now, yes, it has been said that Kakuzu had killed all of his partners until he was teamed up with Hidan, but we never saw that. So for a team that was haphazardly slapped together with each individual member all having different motivations, none of which they fully understood, there was not a whole lot of fighting. And yet that doesn't stop the fandom from wondering what would happen if there was. See, because really when it boils down to it, some of the most popular versus battle in the Naruto community are between different members of the Akatsuki. And by far and away, the most popular fight to talk about out of all of the Akatsuki member versus Akatsuki member fights is Itachi versus Nagato. See, these 2 prodigal sons, wielders of 2 incredibly powerful dojutsus, have been talked about in combat circles for years, with Itachi loyalists screaming to the high heavens that Itachi would solo the entirety of the Akatsuki, Nagato included, and Nagato loyalists screaming back at them that Nagato was the strongest member of the Akatsuki by a landslide. And while I have been vocal about what I believe would be the outcome of this fight a couple of times in short form, I've never broken it down in a long form video. But today, that is exactly what we are going to do, because today we are finally answering the question, who wins in a fight, Itachi or Nagato? But before we get to pondering on the results of this hypothetical fight, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all of that, the holiday season is right around the corner. Have you thought about what you're gonna get for the people that you love? Well, if you haven't, then let me give you a little recommendation from the sponsor of today's video, Holzkern. Holzkern is a company that specializes in the creation of watches and jewelry made from natural materials like wood and stone. And I personally have loved this brand ever since Dorothy got me this watch from them a couple of months ago. See, because as many of you probably don't know, because I never wear watches when I film YouTube videos, I'm a big watch guy. I have a collection that is growing kind of out of my own control. And Holzkern has a lot to do with that. See, Holzkern's products are made in small batches and are all incredibly unique pieces. Now, this comes partially from the fact that they use a lot of materials that aren't often seen in traditional jewelry and watchmaking companies like peacock feathers, nacre, onyx. They even go so far as sometimes to use leaves in their watches. Like this, the Open Horizon watch, which is made from green marble and silver, like this bandlet made of black metal and zebra wood. And therefore with Holzkern, you get a real attention to detail while also maintaining a high level of uniqueness. And this is all because of how Holzkern started. See, it started as a family business in Vienna, Austria, which is, fun fact, where my family is from. And Holzkern remains in Austria to this day, which means all of the products ordered from Holzkern are shipped out from Austria, and Holzkern pays the customs fees themselves. On top of this, Holzkern products come fast, usually within 2 to 5 business days. And they have a guarantee this holiday season that any orders that come in by December 19th will be at your front door by Christmas Day. So use code NCHammer at checkout for 15% off purchases site-wide for a limited time. So what are you guys waiting for? Whether you're looking for high quality quality watches that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, sleek understated bracelets that have unique pops of colors or materials, or reliable and well-fitting sunglasses that are going to make you stand out in the crowd, Holzkern is truly a one-stop shopping location for any gifts you want to buy this holiday season. So when talking about a fight between Itachi and Nagato, we have to establish a couple of rules, because usually when you're building out a versus battle, you're talking about the characters from specific times in the story. And usually the times that you talk about with these characters are the times at which these two characters are at their strongest to make the battle the fairest. However, with Itachi and Nagato, the time at which the both of them were at their strongest is kind of messy, because while this might be a slightly contentious opinion, the time when both Itachi and Nagato were at their strongest, in my opinion, was when they were brought back using Edo Tensei. Yeah, Itachi and Nagato were at their strongest after their deaths. And while the argument could be hypothetically made that this isn't true for Nagato, it is most definitely true for Itachi. See, Itachi, after being brought back with Edo Tensei, isn't ailed by any of the things that nerfed him while he was alive. While Itachi, when he was brought back through Edo Tensei, didn't increase his general chakra pool, meaning comparably to other ninjas of his caliber, he still didn't have that much chakra. But because Edo Tensei infinitely refills the chakra of those who are brought back with it, while Itachi's cap didn't grow, his stamina grew infinitely, basically all but nullifying the chakra disease that stopped him from being in prolonged fights while he was alive. Ties into the fact that Itachi's body was no longer frail because it was no longer racked with a chakra disease, and because he now had infinite regeneration, so even if he was struck by something like hypothetically the bite of an animal path summon, after losing an arm, he would simply be able to regrow it. So his durability after being brought back through Edo Tensei also skyrockets. And then last, but definitely not least, there's also the fact that Itachi basically dies as a blind man after his battle against Sasuke, because years of using and abusing his MS to either kill his entire clan or operate undercover in the Akatsuki led to him slowly but surely losing his vision until eventually in his battle against Sasuke, he basically couldn't see. But because of the infinite regeneration afforded by Edo Tensei, Itachi's eyes would presumably be able to see just fine in this state. And thus when it comes down to the three things that plagued Itachi and made sure that he never became a Madara level threat while he was alive, his lack of eyesight, his lack of durability, and his lack of stamina are all fixed in his Edo Tensei form. So undoubtedly, to me, and probably to you if you have any level of sensibility in your head, the strongest version of Itachi we ever see is his Edo Tensei form. And genuinely, the only argument I would have for any other form rivaling that form in strength would be Itachi on the night of his clan's murder, because this is the only time we never see Itachi hindered by his chakra illness. So the version of Itachi we're going to be talking about today is Edo Tensei Itachi, but that doesn't mean we won't be taking all of his lifetime feats into account. Now, Nagato is a bit of a stickier spot. See, some would tell you that the obvious choice here is also Edo Tensei Nagato, and that's not wrong. Nagato, after the death of Yahiko and the summoning of the Geto statue, Nagato had so much of his chakra drained while summoning the Geto Mazo that he was essentially immobilized for the rest of his life. And while the cost of this immobilization was being able to summon the husk of the Ten Tails and fire a purple dragon out of its mouth that sucked the souls out of anybody it touched, Nagato after this point was forced to become pain. More specifically, the 6 paths of pain. That is to say that Nagato after this point had to find 6 corpses, put chakra rods in them, and then confer to each one of these corpses an aspect of the 6 paths of the Rinnegan. He then had to control these 6 corpses as an extension of his own body because he couldn't walk around with all these chakra rods stabbed into his back. So was this living version of Nagato that controlled the 6 paths of pain stronger than Edo Tensei Nagato? I don't know. That's kind of a tough spot, but the events of Naruto seem to point towards Edo Tensei Nagato being the stronger version. But see, while yes, there is absolutely arguments to be made for both the 6 paths of pain or Edo Nagato, when it comes down to it from a feats perspective, Edo Nagato just has a more impressive resume. While the 6 paths of pain were able to take on people like Sage Mode Jiraiya and Sage Mode Naruto, and obviously Nagato as the 6 paths of pain was able to take on the entirety of Konoha simultaneously, including incredibly powerful ninja like Tsunade and Kakashi. Fundamentally, when it comes down to it, the 6 paths of pain equal out probably just slightly above Sage Mode Naruto, because for all intents and purposes, the 6 paths of pain probably should have beaten Naruto in a fight. And while Naruto in his Sage Mode was the victorious one in that battle, one, he had the assistance of the entirety of Konoha, and while they didn't do nearly as much as Sage Mode Naruto did, he still had their assistance, and 2, Naruto winning that fight was kind of an asshole. So if the 6 paths of pain equal out probably just above Sage Mode Naruto, well then where does Edo Nagato balance out? And the answer is slightly above KCM 1 won Naruto, at least by my estimations, as Nagato's most impressive lifetime feat was going up against Killer Bee, KCM1 Naruto, and Edo Itachi simultaneously while telling them how to defeat him and still proving to be a legitimate threat. And genuinely, I don't believe that KCM1 Naruto would have been able to win in this fight against Edo Nagato by himself. So while yes, I will acknowledge that there is arguments for both sides to be made here, because obviously Edo Nagato doesn't have 7 lives like the 6 paths of pain do, and yes, there's some other possible arguments to say that if Nagato had used 6 Jinchuriki like Obito did for his 6 paths of pain, his ceiling could have been much higher. I think for the fidelity of today's video, we're gonna have to argue Edo Tensei versus Edo Tensei. And with that said, let's get into the fight. So yes, we've already talked about the fact that Edo Itachi and Edo Nagato have kind of already fought. And what the general consensus of people after the conclusion of that fight is, oh, Edo Nagato was way stronger than Edo Itachi. I don't 100% agree with that sentiment. Yes, obviously Nagato is fighting a 1v3, and yes, the 2 people helping Itachi were 2 of the strongest people in the universe at that time. But at the same time, Edo Nagato only reached the level of power that he did in that fight because of blunders by Naruto and Killer Bee. Blunders that most likely Itachi wouldn't have made. See, because here's the thing, while Edo Nagato probably is the strongest version of Nagato we've ever seen, it's the form of Edo Nagato that we see that absorbs the energy of a Rasengan from KCM1 Naruto. That's the strongest version of Nagato we've ever seen. I don't necessarily know if we can say the same thing for the version of Edo Nagato that popped out of Edo Tensei. And that's where this conversation gets interesting. But to set the stage, let's talk about these 2 individual fighters, what their strengths are, and what they're bringing into this battle. And let's start with the golden boy who guarantees when he's included in a video that it's gonna bang on this channel, Itachi. In terms of AP, Itachi's got some pretty impressive feats. See, because while we don't see Itachi involved in a bunch of kicky, punchy fights, we have heard a lot about what his AP looks like. See, unfortunately for the argument of either of these characters' strengths, we're gonna be talking a lot about hacks, which are a bit harder to concretely scale, but we'll get to that in a second. So right out of the jump, one of the first things that we ever see chronologically from Itachi is rather obvious, and that was the massacre of his entire clan. And while in the anime and the manga, we don't see a lot of this outside of the fact that Fugaku didn't fight back against him, but Itachi's second light novel gave us a much deeper look into this night, showing us the true strength that Itachi held on to at the prime age of 13 years old. See, because while Itachi wasn't the only person involved in the Uchiha massacre, Itachi was the person selected to take on all of the fighting men and women of the Uchiha clan, while Obito killed all of the women and children. And while the Uchiha massacre is often talked about like a surprise massacre, it wasn't as big of a surprise as you would think. Now, I'm not saying that the Uchiha knew it was coming, but I am saying that a fair amount of the Uchiha were able to fight back. And on that night, mind you, after using his MS on his girlfriend Azumi for his first kill of the night, placing her in a 70-ish year-long genjutsu using his Tsukiyomi, Itachi proceeded to cut down dozens of high-level Jonin from the Uchiha clan who all had access to 3 Tomei Sharingan, even taking time out of his pretty long, bloody night to spend particular time torturing and killing who he identified as evil Uchihas. And Itachi, by this time, already had a pretty big track record for the brutal way of fighting that he enacted on the Uchiha massacre, as it was revealed in his first light novel in his Chunin exams when Itachi was battling against a Zenitsu-like character who would fight with a high level of proficiency if they were asleep, that Itachi held no penchant for pity. See, because Itachi, while battling in this Chunin exams fight, realized he would have to wake this character up, cast them into a genjutsu so horrific that it would break their brain, and if they fell asleep, he would have to repeat the process. And Itachi did this to this poor 12-year-old boy several times until eventually the boy was so afraid to go back to sleep for fear of being placed in the genjutsu again that this incredibly proficient fighter simply forfeited the match. And this is a level of curiosity that Itachi carries for the rest of his life. Itachi, in the early days of leaving Konoha, decided to join the Akatsuki, and Orochimaru followed him. And Orochimaru, one of the legendary Sannin, and arguably by the end of the story, the strongest of the legendary Sannin, followed Itachi into the Akatsuki to take over his body, and when he had Itachi cornered, tried to do exactly that. It was at this moment that Orochimaru learned about the Sharingan's ability to flip jutsus that are casted on those who have Sharingan back onto the caster. As Orochimaru was placed under the genjutsu he placed on Itachi, and Itachi took that opportunity to cut off Orochimaru's hand. And this moment struck so much fear into Orochimaru that Sasuke openly admitted that the only reason Orochimaru ever came for him is because he knew Itachi was out of the question. Do you realize how insane that is? The person who was almost able to single-handedly destroy Konoha identified Itachi as a no-go. You realize that Orochimaru, without the usage of his arms, fought against a version 2 four-tailed cloaked Naruto and came out kind of in a tie. Mind you, a version 2 four-tailed cloaked Naruto almost killed Jiraiya. While Sasuke was acknowledging that Orochimaru only came after him because Itachi was so powerful, Sasuke simultaneously admitted that Itachi was also out of his ballpark of power. In fact, the databooks told us that Sasuke's visual prowess didn't surpass Itachi's until he unlocked EMS, not MS, EMS. It took Sasuke stealing Itachi's eyes to surpass Itachi's visual prowess. And what's wild is that while we usually talk about Itachi entering into his battle against Sasuke in a weakened state, that may not necessarily be true. Yes, Itachi was prolonging his life with the usage of medical eye drops. Yes, he was mostly blind going in this battle. Yes, he entered the battle with the intention of dying, so much so that he literally programmed his eyes to activate Amaterasu upon seeing Obito's Sharingan, knowing that Sasuke would take them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Itachi didn't go into that battle pretty powerful, because we learned from the first Ultimate Storm game, Generations, that prior to his battle against Sasuke, Itachi was sparring with Kisame at like full speed. And since we're talking about Kisame, Kisame openly admits multiple times that Itachi is more powerful than him. And Kisame went toe-to-toe with Might Guy in the 7th gate. And all of this is without even mentioning his hacks. As one of the least talked about, most impressive things Itachi ever does is going toe-to-toe with 8 branches Orochimaru. See, because when Orochimaru crawls out of Sasuke's curse mark and reveals their true body, their 8 branches technique that turns them into an 8-headed snake, that is one of the most powerful transformations we've seen in the entirety of Naruto. It is a tail beast level transformation. And while it doesn't get fully acknowledged because it gets absolutely desecrated by Itachi, mind you, on his deathbed, Itachi being able to slice the heads off the 8 branches body and stab through Orochimaru's body with his Totsuka blade is wildly impressive, especially when you consider the fact that just prior to that, he had been struck by a Kirin that he barely blocked. And mind you, let's talk about the fact that Itachi was able to block that Kirin. Itachi in the split second, upon seeing his brother starting to summon literal lightning from the sky, which travels at Mach 32, mind you, was able to identify that there was lightning on the way and make his entire armored Susanoo in time to block that attack. And mind you, in one of the databooks, it was identified that Kirin was a mediocre attack when compared to the defensive capabilities of an armored Susanoo. And in actuality, the only reason that Itachi was even remotely injured by Kirin was because of the fact that he wasn't able to react 100% in time. But these are all things that Itachi did while alive. Itachi in his Edo Tensei form went hand for hand in taijutsu with KCM1 Naruto, in arguably one of the fastest and best practiced taijutsu users in all of Naruto, carried the majority of the weight in the battle against Sage Mode Kabuto, and while Sasuke was there to help, if we're being real, he wasn't doing all that much. And while Sage Mode Kabuto was also one of the more memed on characters in all of Naruto, there are very few people in the entirety of Naruto and Naruto Shippuden who were stronger than Sage Mode Kabuto. He is the amalgamation of everything that Orochimaru's ever tried to accomplish, plus Sage Mode. And I'd like to remind all of you that Orochimaru, while having the ability to pass out Senjutsu Chakra through the medium of their curse marks on other people, is not a sage, doesn't have a strong enough body to complete the Sage Mode transformation. Prior to Orochimaru being brought back with Kabuto's flesh and being given a white Zetsu body, Kabuto was stronger than any iteration of Orochimaru we had ever seen, which at the time made Kabuto a top 5 threat in the universe. And mind you, Itachi took him down with the limitation that Itachi wasn't able to kill him. But while Edo Tensei, that's not all that Itachi accomplished. He also went toe-to-toe with Nagato, where he was able to contribute to a 3-way attack with Naruto and Killer Bee that destroyed one of Nagato's Chibaku Tensais, a technique so powerful, mind you, it took 8 tails of Kurama to break out of. He was also able to rip off Nagato's arms and seal him with a Totsuka blade using his Susanoo. So yeah, in terms of AP, Itachi sits pretty comfortably in the island level categorization. And I've come to this conclusion based off the fact that he was A, able to battle against KCM1 Naruto, who was very comfortably island level, and B, destroyed Chibaku Tensei, which is also an island level attack. And considering the fact that Edo Itachi was able to block punches from and land punches on a KCM1 Naruto and keep up with Killer Bee and EMS Sasuke, seems to imply that Itachi is very comfortably sub-relativistic, if not FTL. But someone would make the argument that Naruto doesn't reach FTL himself until he against KCM too, so sub-relativistic is probably the safest estimation for Edo Itachi's speed. Now, let's talk about his hacks. We've talked about a couple of them already, but it's important to have them out in the open. Itachi is obviously a dual MS wielder, and in one of his eyes, he has Amaterasu, the ability to spit out black flames that when they hit their opponent, burn until the opponent is burned to ash, or the caster, Itachi in the situation, turns them off. He also in his other eye has Tsukiyomi, an ability that allows him to cast somebody into a genjutsu so complete that he essentially becomes the god of their universe. And in this genjutsu, he's able to dilate time so he can torture somebody for as long as possible. But it doesn't always necessarily have to be torture, because as like we've already said, Itachi was able to live an entire life along the side of his girlfriend, Izumi Uchiha, in their second light novel. But the shock of waking up from this life that Izumi and Itachi had lived in the Tsukiyomi genjutsu was so intense that it literally killed Izumi. That is to say that Itachi is able to kill with Tsukiyomi. On top of this, as a dual MS wielder, Itachi also has access to the Susanoo. And Itachi's Susanoo, while technically not a complete Susanoo because he never gets EMS, is one of the most powerful Susanos we've ever seen. Between its Yata mirror, a shield that's able to reflect all attacks, be they physical or spiritual, which seems to imply that the Yata mirror is not only able to reflect ninjutsu and taijutsu, but also possibly genjutsu, but also means that the most powerful defensive jutsu in Naruto also now has a defensive boost in an ability that allows for him to make sure that you don't even get to hit the thing that probably wouldn't break from your jutsu in the first place. And on the other hand, Itachi has his, and say it with me now, Sword of Totsuka. A sword that when stabbed through an opponent seals them into the sake gourd that's used as a sheath for this sword, and inside of this sake bottle is a subdimension known as the Realm of Drunken Dreams, implying that Itachi in this Susanoo form not only has complete and total defenses against anything you try to throw at him, but also has a one-shot weapon. Tie that into the fact that he can use any of his jutsus from within the confines of his Susanoo, and in this form has infinitely refilling chakra and instant regeneration, meaning no matter how many MS abilities he uses, his eyes will not degenerate on him. There is genuinely no reason for us to assume that Itachi wouldn't be able to use his Susanoo for the entirety of a battle against Edo Nagato. So that's what we're talking about here, a version of Itachi that's able to use his Susanoo for the entirety of a fight while launching things like Amaterasu or even possibly Tsukiyomi at his opponent. A sub-relativistic island-level threat with infinite durability and infinite stamina. Pretty good. But what are we talking about on the other side of the coin with Nagato? See, unfortunately with Nagato, this conversation becomes a bit more difficult. See, because while I could sit here and say that Edo Nagato is the version of Nagato that was able to refill his energy by absorbing a Rasengan from Naruto, to me that doesn't feel 100% accurate. Yes, technically that version of him is the strongest version of Nagato, and therefore if we're entering the strongest version of Nagato into this fight, it would be that version. To me, saying that's Edo Nagato feels a bit disingenuous because he has to pull off a jutsu in the first place to achieve that state. But because I don't want anybody to feel left out in this conversation or feel as though I've skimped Nagato in this argument, let's talk about Nagato as a whole and talk about his chances if he were to come into this fight in his weakened version as opposed to his strongest version, because the separation between these two forms, I believe, is genuinely very important for this fight. So let's start with Nagato's AP, just in general. And unfortunately, right off the bat, kind of difficult to talk about with him. See, the strength of Nagato varies on a bunch of different factors, especially if you're considering the 6 paths part of Nagato's strength. See, the strength of the 6 paths is highly reliant on A, how close Nagato is to them, and B, how many bodies are currently being moved. And this is seen multiple times, because when Nagato was battling against the entirety of Konoha, he, with 6 bodies active, was able to battle against the likes of Choza, Choji, Kakashi, and a couple of other people simultaneously. He also, with 6 bodies active, was able to battle against Sage Mode Jiraiya rather effectively. And while Sage Mode Jiraiya was able to take out 4 of the 6 paths of pain, unfortunately when it comes down to it, taking out paths of pain only makes the other paths stronger. And this is highlighted by the fact that Jiraiya in his battle against the 6 paths admits that the 3 paths that he were fighting against, if they worked collaboratively, would have been able to kill him. And eventually they did, as the animal path alone was shown to have enough AP to be able to stab through Jiraiya. And this is wild when you consider the fact that the animal path is not only the weakest path, but also the least valuable, according to Nagato and the other paths, as the animal path is usually the first path to be sacrificed. And this is even more nuts when you consider the fact that the summonings of the animal path were able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Gamaken, who was equal to Gamabunta in terms of strength, and Gamabunta fought Shukaku, a tailed beast, one-on-one. But genuinely, when it comes down to it, the 6 six paths of pain's most impressive feats are in the battle against Konoha and Naruto, as during this fight, Nagato showed the ability to easily dissipate Sage Mode boosted Rasen Shurikens, which mind you at that time were roughly mountain level to island level attacks. And this is further corroborated by the fact that in both the battle against Jiraiya and Naruto, the paths of pain were able to easily destroy Gamma Bunta and Gamma Ken in combat, as the paths were able to launch Gamma Bunta and Gamma Ken out of Konoha so powerfully and with so much force that when they landed, it shattered all of their bones. However, genuinely the most powerful we ever saw the six paths get is when Nagato funneled all of his power into the Deva path, like in the beginning of his assault on Konoha when he used an almighty push to destroy an entire village in one fell swoop. And while this move visibly drained Nagato and made it so he couldn't use the Deva path for a couple of minutes, that's not necessarily a huge trade-off for destroying an entire village. Once again, saw the power of concentration when Nagato focused all of his energy into the Deva path once again in the ending of the battle against Naruto, when the Deva path by itself was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of a sage-boosted Naruto, and was even able to overpower a six-tailed version to cloak Naruto. In fact, the Deva path wasn't sufficiently overwhelmed in combat until Naruto awoke to eight tails, and at that point, he wasn't even in control. So considering the fact that the full power of the Deva path was able to go toe-to-toe with basically eight tails of Kurama, meaning that the six paths of pain, not even the strongest iteration of Nagato by our own calculations, had an AP of roughly island level, as a full-powered Kurama roughly falls in around island level. But what's wilder is that Edo Nagato is fully admitted to be stronger than the six paths of pain by Naruto, because in chapter 550 and 551, while Naruto is battling against Edo Nagato alongside Killer Bee and Edo Itachi, Naruto freely admits that Nagato's jutsus are now more powerful because he's not acting through six bodies anymore. So if the full concentration of Nagato channeling his power across a great distance into the Deva path was island level, and Naruto openly admits that this is now a stronger version of Nagato, then that would mean that Edo Nagato probably falls into somewhere of the categorization of island level plus as an AP. Now mind you, this was the version of Nagato that absorbed Rasengan from Naruto, got the red back in his hair, and was at a full strength, that is to say, back in his prime, which means that that's as high as we can highball Nagato, island level plus for his AP. And in terms of speed, really when it comes down to it, Edo Nagato has the exact same highball speed feats as Edo Itachi, which is the ability to keep up with KCM1 Naruto and Killer Bee, which makes Edo Nagato also very comfortably sub-relativistic, which means so far as concrete comparables, Edo Nagato and Edo Itachi seem pretty evenly matched. So why does everybody always talk about Edo Nagato as the clear winner in this fight? Well, it probably has something to do with his hacks. See, because yeah, Edo Nagato's hacks are kind of wild. See, while Nagato never got any fancy Rinnegan abilities that were specific to him, like Limbo clones or Heavenly Hand Power, Nagato is still probably the most effective user of the Rinnegan we've ever seen. That is to say that Nagato said, oh, you're gonna give me all of the abilities of the Rinnegan? Yeah, I'm probably gonna use all of those abilities. Something that neither Madara or Sasuke really fully took advantage of. So yeah, when it really boils down to it, Nagato's hacks are kind of just the six paths and the outer path abilities conveyed by the Rinnegan. So what are those technically seven paths? Well, with the Deva path, Nagato is able to control attractive and repulsive forces, which usually manifest as his almighty push or his almighty pull. The Ashura path allows for Nagato to augment his body in a mechanized kind of way, either turning his hand into a rocket launcher, giving himself a giant serrated blade tail, or making new arms. Basically, whatever Nagato wants to do with his body, he's able to. The human path allows for Nagato to remove somebody's soul and read their memories. The animal path allows for Nagato to summon a wide variety of incredibly powerful summons. The Predator path allows Nagato to absorb any form of ninjutsu fired at him and use it to fill his own battery of chakra. Actually, technically allows for him to absorb all chakra that just so happens to include ninjutsu. And the Naraka path, inarguably the least used path we see out of all of the six paths of pain, allows Nagato to summon the King of Hell, which has been seen to be able to heal the six paths of pain if they're thrown into the mouth of the King of Hell. Now, as to whether or not it would be able to heal Nagato's main body if he was injured in combat, we don't necessarily know. Those are just the six paths. Nagato also has access to the outer path, which comes from a Rinnegan user being able to summon and control the abilities of the Geto Mazo. Kind of. A more accurate description would be that the outer path allows for the user of the Rinnegan to control the balance between life and death, as the abilities most often attributed to the outer path control are things like Rinne Rebirth, which allows the Rinnegan user to bring the dead back to life at the cost of their own life, and the ability to create chakra receivers that can send and transmit chakra, which allow for things like the control of the six paths of pain, but it also allows for the control of the chakra chains that tie their roots back to the Geto Mazo. Gedomazo. Like the chakra chains that we see Madara fire out of the Gedomazo's mouth to grab all of the tailed beasts and pull them into the husk of the Ten Tails to recreate the Ten Tails. So there's actually 7 abilities of the 6 paths technique. So what does all of this mean for Nagato? Well, essentially it means that he has the ability to flatten entire villages with repulsive forces, absorb any and all chakra, which allows him to refill his own battery, which also makes him basically invulnerable to the concept of ninjutsu, remove the soul of anybody he gets his hands on, immediately ending the fight the second he lays hands on somebody, summon a wide variety of summoning animals that are as powerful as the most powerful summoning animals we've seen in the entirety of Naruto, somewhat endlessly, as we've never necessarily seen a hard limit to the amount of animals that can be summoned by the animal path, possibly use a full heal by summoning the King of Hell and throwing himself into it whenever he gets injured, create rocket launchers, tails, additional arms, and if none of that works, oh yeah, he's also able to summon and control the husk of the Ten Tails, a summoning animal so powerful that it was able to go against a fully transformed Choza and Choji simultaneously and win. Mind you, without any of the chakra of the tailed beasts at that time. Or maybe it did have the chakra of a couple of tailed beasts at that time. I can't remember if the tailed beasts were inside the Gedomazo or outside the Gedomazo at that time. But regardless, that is to say that a battle against Nagato is not just a battle against Nagato. It's a battle against Nagato and however many summons he decides to use in this battle against you. And thus, with all of this information now crammed into our heads, who wins? Nagato or Itachi? Well, let's break this down in 2 separate ways. See, like we've already established, there's 2 different versions of Edo Nagato. There's the version of Edo Nagato that was so incredibly weak and fragile that he had to have his arm around Itachi's shoulder to simply walk. And then there was the younger, prime version of Edo Nagato who actually absorbed chakra from Killer Bee, not Naruto, who had a full level of mobility and was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of KCM1 Naruto, Killer Bee, and Itachi simultaneously. Now, while the difference between these 2 modes is significant physically, it doesn't appear to be that significant chakra-wise. See, because while yes, this version of Edo Nagato was frail and weak and could barely walk on his own, this version of Nagato was still an incredibly potent fighting force, being able to use his animal path to summon both his flying animal path and his multi-headed dog, launch an almighty pull on Naruto, create a Chubaku Tensei, and pull it towards Naruto simultaneously, use almighty push to fire Amaterasu off of his body, and once again finally use an almighty push so powerful that it launched a KCM1 Naruto straight through a forest. Not to mention the durability of this version of Nagato was so high he was able to eat a lariat from a version 2 Killer Bee. So the first question we're going to answer here is, does Itachi beat this weakened version of Edo Nagato? And I guess the more pertinent question there is, would Itachi be able to feed enough chakra to Edo Nagato that he'd be able to return to his prime state? I think the answer to that question is no. See, rather interestingly, right before Nagato is lariated by the version 2 Killer Bee, he's hit by Amaterasu by Itachi. Even though in this moment, Nagato does have the option to simply absorb the flames of Amaterasu and possibly charge his chakra battery, he rather uses Almighty Push to push the Amaterasu flames off him. This shows us a couple of very important things, both from the perspective of Itachi and Nagato. One, the first thing is that Nagato identifies that the Amaterasu flames are not worth absorbing from a chakra perspective, and rather the more effective use of his jutsus would simply be to dissipate the Amaterasu flames by pushing them off his body. This also tells us that Itachi believed that Amaterasu would be a suitable ability in combat against Nagato. And while obviously we can sit here and say, because we've seen the battle play out, that duh, Itachi, why would you try to use Amaterasu in a battle against Nagato? For all intents and purposes, Itachi wasn't wrong here. Nagato in this state didn't have the speed to dodge Amaterasu. While dodging Amaterasu is a thing that we've seen a multitude of people do, Nagato in this state didn't have the speed or dexterity to dodge Amaterasu, and Amaterasu was able to burn away a fair amount of Nagato's body. Now I know there's probably some of you out there saying, but Itachi should have known that Nagato's body was gonna regenerate. Why? Why would he know that? Edo Tensei, prior to the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, had been used once. And that was in a battle between Hiruzen and Orochimaru that happened where nobody else could see. And mind you, this was already after Orochimaru had defected from the Akatsuki. There was no interlapping between Itachi and Orochimaru after Orochimaru's battle against Hiruzen. And mind you, Kabuto did all of the formulation for his perfected version of Edo Tensei by himself. There's no reason for Itachi and Nagato to know how Edo Tensei works when you consider the fact the first people they interacted with were Killer Bee and Naruto. So Itachi, in that moment where he douses Nagato's body with Amaterasu flames, genuinely believed that this would be enough to kill Nagato, and it should have been based off how much Itachi knew about their current forms. All this is to say that Itachi didn't have prior knowledge of how Edo Tensei worked until he fought against Nagato. And now to my second point, assuming that this was a battle between Itachi and Nagato with no Jinchuriki in the mix, I don't necessarily believe there's a situation in which Nagato is able to recuperate enough chakra to go back to his prime form. Mind you, Itachi is known for being the ninja of the highest caliber with the least amount of chakra. And while, yes, hypothetically, something like Susanoo does require a mass amount of chakra, Itachi should most likely understand exactly how the 6 paths of pain work. While Itachi and Nagato have never necessarily been assigned to duty to work together, as Nagato is always with Konan, there's no reason for us to assume that individual Akatsuki members don't know the abilities and spectrum of power of other Akatsuki members. And thus, if we're assuming that Itachi understands that Nagato would be able to absorb any and all ninjutsu, the Susanoo very much included, it would make sense that Itachi wouldn't necessarily try to feed Nagato any chakra. Ties into the fact that the chakra of Tailed Beast has always been claimed to be the most potent form of chakra in existence, which is a claim quite literally corroborated by the fact that Samehada leaves Kisame for Killer Bee's incredibly potent Gyuki chakra, and that Naruto's chakra is so incredibly potent that when he comes into contact with wood release, it causes it to sprout life. It would make sense that if anything was going to return Nagato back to his prime form, it would be the chakra of either Killer Bee or Naruto. So in this battle that starts between a weakened Edo Nagato and Edo Itachi, I do genuinely believe that Edo Nagato probably stays in that weakened form. And in this battle, I believe Itachi wins. See, the speed of Nagato in his weakened form is a genuine problem. While yes, in his weakened form, he was still battling against KCM1 Naruto and Edo Itachi simultaneously, Nagato identified that the second that Itachi used Amaterasu on his multi-headed dog, that Itachi had broken out of Edo Tensei. And yet, even after identifying that Itachi was no longer on his side, he was still hit by Amaterasu, a technique that he knew about and most likely understood. A claim which corroborated by the fact that Nagato knew exactly how to nullify Amaterasu. And yet Nagato in this form, with the full knowledge that Itachi was most likely about to attack him, could not dodge Amaterasu. And not only that, he didn't try to absorb Amaterasu, which implies either he didn't believe he had to, or he doesn't have the ability to. And while Amaterasu in this battle is by far and away not a kill shot, it would prove itself as an incredibly useful weapon. See, simply forcing Nagato into a state where he has to recuperate the integrity of his body gives Itachi an ability to end this fight in the only way that Itachi could, which is the Sword of Totsuka. And if Nagato isn't fast enough to point dodge Amaterasu from the distance that Itachi was at, and Amaterasu, yes, does have a travel time, when people who were substantially slower than Itachi in his Edo Tensei form were able to dodge Amaterasu, that means that there's really no reason for us to assume that Itachi probably couldn't outspeed his own Amaterasu, closing the gap between himself and Nagato and finishing the fight with his Totsuka blade. And for those of you saying, oh, but what about his Tsukiyomi? Unfortunately, in this fight between two people with high-level ocular dojutsu, Genjutsu is kind of a moot point. They both have high enough Genjutsu resistance that either of them trying to use Genjutsu against each other would just be a waste of chakra and time. Okay, so what you're telling me, Nick, is if Itachi and Nagato, instead of walking down the beach together, just decided to fight, the second they were brought back, Itachi would win, right? Yeah, that is what I'm saying. But what about if they both fought at their most powerful? What if hypothetically we're talking about a version of Nagato that was able to absorb the chakra of either Killer Bee or Naruto and return to his prime state? Who wins in that fight? Well, it's not Itachi. See, well, yes, a Nagato that is basically unable to move under the power of his own body does lose in a battle against Edo Itachi. But, Prime Nagato, who can move, doesn't. See, Prime Edo Nagato was going up against 3 of the top 7 strongest people in Naruto simultaneously. And while that fight eventually did end in him losing, it was a 1v3, and Nagato spent the entire battle educating the 3 people he was fighting against simultaneously on how to beat him. Here's the thing. Admittedly, a bunch of Nagato's hacks would not work against Itachi. In fact, a bunch of Nagato's hacks would actually just be a really bad idea to use in a battle against Itachi. If Nagato were to try to use his animal path ability in combat against Itachi, Itachi would be pretty much the only person in the history of Naruto who would be able to get rid of the animal paths for good. See, because using a gigantic summoning is not a good idea in battle against Itachi. Orochimaru proved that. The Sword of Totsuka could simply seal each and every single one of the animal paths in one fell swoop. However, these would still be enemies that Itachi would have to cut down. But then when you tie these summoning animals that could weigh down Itachi's offensive output into the fact that Itachi needed to recruit the help of both Naruto and Killer Bee to destroy a Chibaku Tensei that he very much identified as a threat to his life, and that seems to point towards the fact that Itachi doesn't have enough offensive output output by himself to counteract the Chibaku Tensai. And consider the fact that Chibaku Tensai is a sealing ability so complete that it was able to seal away Kaguya, though in its 6 paths form, in a battle between two people who could only win using Fuinjutsu against each other, that seems like a pretty compelling argument for a win state for Nagato. Tie that into the fact that neither of Itachi's MS abilities really do anything against Nagato, as he both has resistance to Tsukiyomi because of his Rinnegan, and Amaterasu can either be absorbed or rejected through an almighty push, and really when it comes down to it, the only hack that would even stand a remotely good chance at winning against Nagato would be Itachi Susanoo, which Nagato would be able to absorb because it's made of chakra. In fact, there's even technically an argument to be made that Nagato would be able to absorb the Totsuka blade because it is a chakra construct, and thus if Nagato hypothetically wanted to launch a gigantic attack at Itachi Susanoo, he could make a shadow clone that absorbed his Yata mirror and parts of his Susanoo to make sure that the technique landed on a part of the undefended Itachi's body. But really, it just boils down to Chibaku Tensai. If Itachi wasn't able to destroy the core of Chibaku Tensai by himself, Nagato would simply just need to make one, and then Itachi would be sealed. And that's the unfortunate truth of it all for Itachi fanboys. Nagato wins this fight, and it's not that difficult for him. The difference between Prime Nagato and Weakened Nagato is absolutely insane when you consider the fact that Weakened Nagato could barely stand, and Prime Nagato could trade fists with a KCM1 Naruto and Taijutsu. That's an insane boost. But Itachi fans rejoice, yes, in the purest sense, if Itachi and Nagato, the second that they were reincarnated using Edo Tensai, looked at each other and decided to fight, Itachi would win. But that's not the strongest version of Nagato. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Based off all the information I've given you today, who did you think takes the dub here? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I'm gonna go take a nap because I'm jet lagged and I woke up at 4:30 a.m. this morning.